Hello, welcome back. This is Alexei and Dr. Welton. So, you on the last before the break, you told us that it's pretty much an act of love just to wear a mask. And no, nowadays in our society, but but the question still is about church and masks. So, and you told us you will lead us to that answer.
Yeah, I mean it's a hot topic, so I don't know that anybody's necessarily collecting data yet
Mhm.
to help us understand it. It's unfortunately something that's become a political hot button
Yes.
that your individuals on the left are saying you got to wear masks, and the individuals on the right saying we're not going to do it, and a couple individuals who are left in the middle saying, "Come on, people, let's
Just,
move beyond this."
yeah, just be kind.
So when we first in our church first went to services with 50 or 60 people, when
Mhm.
the governor turned our county green, Um, for a few weeks, we had masks expected in the morning
Mhm.
and masks encouraged in the evening.
But not expected.
And virtually nobody wore a mask in the evening.
Yeah.
That, when I was there in the evening, it was like three people who were wearing a mask. And I mean, I don't like wearing a mask. And it's a lot harder when it's hot.
Oh yes.
Um, we've intentionally turned the air conditioning down a little bit more in the
Mhm.
building because of the masks, although we've had some trouble with the air conditioning the last few days.
Yeah.
Um, but um, so it was, we thought it important to have a mask required service
Mhm.
because there were people who thought it was too dangerous for them to come if people weren't wearing masks.
Mhm.
That particularly people who are over 70 are at higher risk.
Right.
Sometimes the media says over 60, but I don't like to say that. There is a
Um,
jump for those of us who are in the 60s, but it's a much larger jump in the 70s.
mhm.
And then there are other individuals, not because of age, but because of physical ailments, who are at greater risk.
Right.
Their white blood count is low, or whatever. And so, in order to make the church service available to those individuals, um, we required masks in the morning.
Mhm.
But after just a couple weeks of that, the governor came out with a new mandate saying you ought to be wearing masks whenever you're in those public situations. And so we went to the mask expected for both services. Um, we were a little hesitant at that first decision to have a mask service and a non-mask service. It's like, are we going to create this sort of us versus them?
Mhm.
Well, I'm of Paul and I'm of Apollos. Well, I'm of the mask crew. I'm of the mask freedom crew. It's like,
Yeah.
well, we don't want to go there. I mean, we want to protect individuals. We want to make the church service available. Um, so I haven't heard of particular issues in our particular church fellowship. But
Mhm.
again, just yesterday, a phone call of somebody. This phone call was from someone who had just had um, a baby. Baby is 10 weeks old,
Ooh.
and she was hesitant to go back to church, given that. in her particular church, people are refusing to wear masks.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Um,
Yeah, some time ago I watched one video on Facebook of one pastor, I believe in Washington D.C., when all these rules and regulations came in, and he so yeah, he I think his congregation got a letter from government saying this and this how it should happen and blah blah blah, and he was like, just during regular worship service, I guess he just tore it apart and saying, no, we're not letting the government tell us how we should worship our God, whether it's online or masks or something. And I'm like, I kind of do get you, but then like, really? So,
yeah. Um, and I go right back to that second great commandment. We must love our neighbor as ourselves. I heard somebody say early on in this crisis that you should interact and treat other people assuming that you're already infected. You don't think you're infected, you hope you're not infected, but you don't know that.
right.
And the proper way to treat other people is to treat them in a way that respects their potential safety. Um,
Yeah.
there are some churches in town that are not singing
Mm-hmm.
because when we sing, we're releasing more droplets, and it could be a dangerous thing. We've not taken that step in our church. It's that we're wearing masks and we're social distancing. Um,
So do you think we are going to not sing in our church too?
I haven't. I would be surprised
Mm-hmm.
if we went in that direction. Um, but I don't know how things will develop. I mean, maybe. I mean, week by week, everything. The guidelines keep changing, and
Right. Yeah, pretty. It does really sound like nobody really knows what's going on and what to do and how to deal with this. But why we should care about statistics? That's statistics and psychology, both as Christians and non-Christians. Why do we need to?
so I mean, statistics will give us another window of insight
Mm-hmm.
into what's happening in the world, how the world works, etc.
Mm-hmm.
That much of what we know in medicine, in treating illnesses and diseases of all sorts,
Mm-hmm.
has benefited from the field of statistics. Um, Classic book that came out 10 years ago on cancer. And in that book, there are sections that are just rich on how statistics impacted our understanding of these various cancerous diseases
Mm-hmm.
and our means of treating them. Um, I indicated a little earlier that some of the ways we treated COVID-19 in March and April
Mm-hmm.
seemed to be the right thing to do. But when you clock those cases and what happened and do the statistics and crunch the numbers, it's like actually people who were put on ventilators early died at a higher rate than people who were put on ventilators later.
Oh.
That it seemed to make sense to put people on ventilators sooner.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not a biologist. not a chemist,
Neither am I.
but it seems as if putting people on ventilators earlier created a richer environment for the uh, immune system to overwhelm the individual,
Mhm.
and that doing the ventilator when it was essential rather than early on preventative actually was the better way to go. But we make those decisions by gathering the data, crunching the numbers,
Mhm.
testing hypotheses. So as I look at the data in Pennsylvania, I see um, the correlation between number of cases and number of deaths declining over the
Mhm.
last week.
So it's a good sign.
And that's a good thing. Um, Maybe it's temporary. It's a novel virus. I don't pretend to know what's going to happen in the next week.
Mhm.
But at least in our region, there are good signs from the statistical trend lines.
Mhm. That it will be good.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, most certainly. Um, but how, how do you see God in your field of study?
So while most of what I do right now
Mhm.
is crunching numbers, and
Lots of numbers.
I'm heavily involved. Colleges across the country need to be accredited.
Mhm.
The way they maintain their accreditation is collect data on all the things the college is doing to show
Mhm.
what's working, what needs improvement, what we can do. So I do a lot of number crunching.
Mhm.
And while my training certainly involved statistics and assessment, the content area of my training was on conflict resolution.
Oh, can you talk about it?
So you can envision the interest that I had in that topic,
Mhm.
having as a college student seeing my church split.
Yes.
Um, and so I became quite interested in that whole area of how can we work with other
Is
people.
it more like why conflicts arise or how we can solve them? Or it's a mixture of
Yeah, it's a mixture of
everything?
both, but I think I've been more interested in the question of how we seek to resolve them.
Hmm. So, what would be the best way to resolve a conflict?
Well, I mean, we would encourage you to look deeper and try to understand the conflict at its foundational level.
Hmm.
We often fight over things that are sort of the evident issue, but what really is of concern is at a lower level.
Hmm.
If there's, one ice cream bar and I want it and you want it, there's only one ice cream bar, and either you eat it or I eat it or we cut it in half.
But nobody wants to share.
But with conflict, it's not necessarily that the issue is just the ice cream bar. That
Hmm.
that maybe if we can talk through it, maybe we can understand what is more at the foundational level
Hmm.
and potentially deal with that. The Apostle Paul, in one of his letters to the Corinthians, takes them to task for taking other Christians to court.
Hmm.
Is there not someone among you who has the wisdom and knowledge to help you resolve this within the Christian community rather than taking your conflict to court? Now, I'm not against the court
Hmm.
system. When you have a case of, murder, nobody is saying that, you can necessarily handle that through a, one-on-one encounter.
Right.
But lots of our cases are poorly handled just by having a judge or a jury say, you're right, you're wrong, if we have to continue dealing with each other.
Right.
So if you and I are neighbors and we're constantly causing trouble with each other,
Somebody needs to move out.
yeah, or a judge comes in and says you owe him $1,000. Next week you still live next door to each other. You still aren't getting along. You still haven't learned to, deal with respect and honor, and so there are actually, at least in certain parts of our country, there are centers that exist solely for the purpose of helping people work through those kinds of conflicts. It really started in the Amish and Mennonite communities. The Amish and Mennonite really took this injunction of the Apostle Paul very seriously. So that if you drive through an Amish area like in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, you will actually see centers that are conflict reconciliation centers.
Oh,
So that,
and is it even right now?
I'm sorry?
Is it also today too, nowadays?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Um, when done well, it's much more effective than having a judge say, you're right, you're wrong. It's much cheaper than taking something to court. So not only have some church groups like the Amish done such things, that state and local governments have sometimes recognized, hey, this is a way to save a lot of money in our judicial system. So in the state of New York, to our north, they have a center of this sort in every county.
Ooh.
The rural counties don't have so many people. Their center might only be open one afternoon a week. But the cities have, centers that are open 5 days a week. And I volunteered in one of those centers when I was a graduate student in New York, did some research there, did some research since on conflict resolution, sort of petty conflicts, not the, serious crimes.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is really interesting. So, but how about psychology?
So this is psychology because it's criminal justice, but it deals a lot with person-to-person interaction, getting along with one another. I've seen cases of irate grandparents shouting at their neighbors across the table from them, pointing a cane in their face, really angry at the kinds of interactions that were happening with each other. And such aggressive behavior is part of what we study in the field of psychology.
Right. So, do they also suggest you how to overcome it?
So what is our goal in conflict? Is our goal to resolve it, or is our goal to manage it? There are actually two leading journals in the field. One is called the Journal of Conflict Resolution. The other one is called the International Journal of Conflict Management. And it's not just a difference of words. It actually has a very different implication.
At some point, sounds like um, sounds that we not only Christians but all people should be aware of all of this.
Yeah, we get ourselves into conflicts and scrapes all the time. and having a better understanding of how to interact with people, how to
Mm-hmm.
help people interact with each other.
Right.
So in America, we tend to think more about how do we resolve the conflict,
Mm-hmm.
whereas in many societies, it's more how do we manage the conflict. Conflict happens, it's inevitable in our fallen, sinful
Mm-hmm.
world. We're not going to come up with a perfect fix, but we've got to learn to manage it. So that the notion of conflict management is actually a very different notion than that of conflict resolution. It
Hmm.
says, we can't necessarily resolve it, but we can learn to manage it and live in a civil way with one another, even if we don't necessarily agree on whether we ought to be wearing masks or not.
Right. Yeah, so kind of have to find that golden middle.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. It's, but where do you see God in all of that? Like you as a Christian professor and already have a bunch of experience on your back. So what would you say to that?
And and of course, one of the applications is to conflict in the church because we don't get along with one another in the church very well either. So,
Yeah, and that's something um, upsets me that we do have these conflicts even in church, and of course, Bible also warns us about this, and that one particular passage that is interesting. I don't remember where it's written, but it goes um, like if you come to the altar to sacrifice to God, and you remember, I have a conflict with that and that person, leave your gift and go reconcile with that person. Make sure it's all good with you. Or, of course, there are in some other places about the conflict, and like try to reconcile with that person before you both go to court or
right.
something.
So that requires at the basic level a certain degree of humility
Yeah, and to understand what's the problem.
to recognize that, I'm not, I don't know everything. I don't always have it right. And I could be the person in the wrong here.
Hmm.
And that's not the way we think in our society today. Today we think I've got it right, and everybody who disagrees with me is in big trouble. And we don't have that
Well,
humility, and without that humility, it's going to be really hard to deal with that conflict.
yeah, but also right now, I think I don't know. Maybe it's just the youth, but could be also some elderly people. Like we can both be like right. Like you have your opinion. You're right. I have mine opinion. You don't have to agree with that, but I think I'm right. And like not saying that somebody is wrong, but okay, I can tell you you're wrong, but I never wrong. So that's something also that we have to deal with,
That's right.
but it doesn't always end up well.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, conflict is going to be an inherent part of our
Hmm.
lives as humans because we are so often selfish, self
Hmm.
centered, and as Christians or not, and we can easily get ourselves into trouble. We need to be quick to apologize, we need to be quick to forgive, and I don't see a lot of that.
Yeah. So, but then, how do we forgive someone? Like, yeah, we do know that there is a conflict, but then should we solve it, or should we manage the conflict, or should we just let go and let God with that conflict?
So we've transitioned into another one of my topics of interest.
Oh, nice.
So a number of years ago, a couple colleagues and I were given a research grant to
Mhm.
fund research on this topic of forgiveness.
Mm.
And we actually went to one of these conflict centers, and that's where we did our research and collected our data.
Mhm.
All of the individuals we studied in that particular project were individuals, couples who were splitting up.
Mhm.
So
Let's probably take a small break and come back to have full
all right, very good.
time to that.
Look forward to it.